At 1:47 a.m., I was sitting alone in my office when my phone buzzed. The message from my daughter left me frozen. Paying for the wedding is your obligation, Dad, but I can't have an old man reeking of delivery trucks walk me down that aisle in front of his family. Know your place. I read those words again and again in the dark. But instead of calling her to argue, I stared at a folder on my desk. They thought I was nothing more than the man paying the bills. What they didn't know was that before sunrise, I was about to do something that would make the entire wedding disappear. I am grateful you chose to stay. Before this story starts, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Your city, your country? I want to know. Note some elements in this story are fictional, crafted for storytelling and educational value. Names and settings are coincidental. The lesson, however, that one belongs to all of us. The clock on the mantelpiece above my desk read 1:47 in the morning. But that was a number that had long since lost its power to surprise me. I had not slept past 4 a.m. in 35 years. My body had simply stopped expecting to. I sat at the same battered oak desk I had bought from an estate sale on James Island, back when Adrienne was 11 years old, back when second-hand was the only kind of anything I could afford. There was a scratch on the left corner where she used to drag her pencil case and a heat ring from a coffee mug that had never been replaced. I had the money now. I kept the desk. Outside, Charleston breathed the way only Charleston does. At that hour, not silence, but a warm, layered stillness pressing against the window glass, carrying the low pulse of the harbor and the occasional creak of palmetto fronds in the April wind. Delivery route schedules lay spread across my desk, beside a stack of invoices from Dunn Harvest Foods, my company, 80 employees on the payroll, built over 3 decades from a single refrigerated truck, and a willingness to work hours that other men would not name out loud. My reading glasses sat low on my nose. My right hand, the one with a scar across the knuckle from a loading dock accident 20 years back, held a yellow highlighter that had not moved in 10 minutes. I was no longer thinking about invoices. I was thinking about my daughter, the way I did most nights at this hour, the quiet, helpless thinking of a man who loved someone he could not quite reach anymore. The phone buzzed against the desk. I picked it up without concern. Messages at this hour came from my overnight dispatch team, a truck running behind schedule, a route delay on Highway 17, the usual small crises of a distribution business that never fully slept. I tilted the screen toward me and read the name at the top of the notification. Adrienne. My chest pulled tight, a quick, involuntary clench. The way a hand closes around something before the mind has decided whether to hold on or let go. I opened the message. Paying for the wedding is your obligation, Dad, but I can't have an old man reeking of delivery trucks walk me down that aisle in front of his family. Know your place. I read it once. I set the phone face down on the oak surface, pressed both palms flat against the wood, and looked up at the framed photograph on the wall, the first Dunn Harvest Foods truck, dented bumper, hand-painted logo. Adrienne had helped me paint those letters on a Saturday afternoon when she was 9, her small tongue pressed between her teeth in fierce concentration, while I held the stencil steady. My jaw locked until the back teeth ached. I pressed harder against the desk, feeling the grain of the old wood under my palms, grounding myself in something solid and entirely my own. Then I picked the phone up and read the message again. You know your place. What replaced the burning was not rage and not grief. It was something colder and much cleaner, absolute clarity. The kind that arrives when a man finally understands down to his bones exactly where he stands. My gaze moved to the right corner of the desk. The green accordion folder sat exactly where I had left it 3 hours earlier. I reached for it, now opened it, and turned to the signature page of the first contract. Then the second. Then the third. Fletcher Dunn, sole responsible party. Fletcher Dunn's sole responsible party. Fletcher Dunn's sole responsible party. 18 pages, 18 signature lines. Not a single one bearing the name Vane. I closed the folder. I typed my reply slowly, deliberately, with full knowledge of what the words meant. 6 words. Then I will keep the 60,000. I pressed send. Then I called Josephine Harker. 1:52 in the morning. I had learned long ago that the space between a decision and an action was the only place where nerve went to die. I gave my nerve no space at all. She answered on the 3rd ring. Fletcher, a pause. It is almost 2 in the morning. I know the hour, Joe. I need you to make some calls tonight, before I find a reason to wait until morning. I heard the soft click of a bedside lamp coming on. Tell me what happened, Josephine Harker said. I told her everything. Before I tell you what Josephine Harker did with the information I gave her at 1:52 in the morning, you need to know who Fletcher Dunn is. Not what people like Lenora Vane decided I was the moment they shook my hand, who I actually am, where I came from, and why any of this matters. Let me take you back 35 years. Charleston City Market at 3 in the morning smells like wet concrete, and yesterday's produce and a particular kind of loneliness that you only recognize if you have ever been genuinely bone-deep broke. I was 28 years old, sweeping the vendor aisles before the morning merchants arrived at $6 an hour. Cash. The supervisor, a heavy-set man named Roy, who wore the same gray shirt every single day, told me during the interview that most new hires quit within a week. I gripped that broom handle and thought about my wife waiting at home with a 4-year-old daughter in a rented duplex on the east side of the peninsula, and I told him I would not be quitting. Rosalind. I could spend the rest of this story trying to explain her and still fall short. She was a woman who laughed the way good weather arrives suddenly and thoroughly, filling every corner of a room. She had grown up in Beaufort, the daughter of a shrimping family, with the particular toughness that coastal people develop when they grow up watching storms roll in, off the water, and learning that you cannot outrun them, only prepare and hold on. She believed in me with the specific, unflinching certainty of someone who had decided a thing and saw no reason to revisit the decision. When I came home from that first week at the market, hands cracked from the cold, Rosalind took one look at my face and said, "You are not going to do this forever, Fletcher. This is the start, not the finish." She was right. She was almost always right. We saved. We went without. By the time Adrienne started 1st grade, I had enough to buy a second-hand refrigerated truck from a retiring distributor, and Dunn Harvest Foods was a name on a door instead of just a name in my head. And then Rosalind got sick. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in October, when Adrienne was 5, and the company had its first real contract. Rosalind sat across the kitchen table and told me what the doctor had said, and her voice did not shake once. Mine did. I gripped the edge of that table so hard that when I finally let go, there were white marks on my palms. "Don't you fall apart on me, Fletch," she said, covering my hands with hers. "Adrienne needs to see you hold together. That's your job right now." I held together. Rosalind fought for 14 months. But on a rainy March morning when Adrienne was 6 years old, Rosalind Dunn left the world in a hospital room on the 3rd floor of MUSC Medical Center, while I held her right hand, and our daughter slept on a waiting room chair down the hall. The last coherent thing she said to me before the morphine pulled her under for the final time was this: "Walk her down the aisle, Fletch." Her fingers tightened around mine, weaker than they had ever been, but intentional. "Promise me you will walk her down that aisle." Tears ran down my face, and I did not wipe them away, because I needed both hands to hold hers. "I promise," I managed. "I promise you, Roz." She died 4 hours later. I raise all of this not for pity. I raise it so that when I tell you what Adrienne's text message did to me, you understand what it was aimed at. It was not just about a ceremony. It was about a promise made to a dying woman, and my daughter, who had grown up knowing that story, had looked at it and decided it was an inconvenience. Now Darnell came to work for me 8 years after Rosalind passed, when the company had grown to 12 trucks. He was 40, then broad-shouldered, with the kind of slow, deliberate speech that people sometimes mistake for simplicity, until he says the one thing that cuts straight through whatever argument everyone else is circling around. He had grown up 3 blocks from the market where I used to sweep. We understood each other without having to explain ourselves, which is the rarest thing there is between two people. Rosalind used to say that the truest things about a person are the things they do when no one important is watching. I had spent 35 years building a company in the hours before anyone important was awake. And it had given me, among other things, the green accordion folder on the corner of my desk, and a lawyer on the other end of a phone call at 2 in the morning who was already reaching for a pen. The phone call came on a Wednesday afternoon in early June, 14 months before the night everything came apart. I was standing outside the Dunn Harvest Foods warehouse on Garfield Street, squinting into the low afternoon sun with a refrigeration repair estimate in one hand and a cold cup of coffee in the other, when Adrienne's name appeared on my phone. I set both things down on the hood of the nearest truck and answered immediately. Dad. Her voice had a quality I had not heard in a long time. Bright and slightly breathless, the voice of a younger version of herself, the girl who used to call me from college when something genuinely good had happened. I need to tell you something. My chest opened up. Just like that. Whatever the morning had cost me, all of it, stepped back to make room for that voice. Tell me, I said. I am getting married. I laughed a full, unguarded laugh that startled a pigeon off the warehouse roof. Tell me everything. Right now. Start from the beginning. His name was Everett Vane. She had met him 4 months earlier at a fundraiser at the Gibbs Museum downtown. He worked in investment capital, had grown up in Charleston, came from what she described with a particular brightness in her voice as one of the city's established families. He made her feel, she said, pausing, searching for the word, like the world was larger than she thought it was. I did not say anything cautious. My daughter was 31 years old, a sharp and capable woman, and she sounded the way Rosalind had sounded the morning after I asked her to marry me, like she had made a decision she already knew was right. Bring him to dinner, I said. Let me shake his hand. She did. Everett Vane was tall, well-dressed, without being showy, with the particular ease that comes from never having needed to work very hard to be liked. He called me Mr. Dunn, and then when I corrected him, called me Fletcher without stumbling. He asked genuine questions about the company. I could not find a flaw in him that evening, and I told Adrienne as much when I walked her to her car. She hugged me tighter than she had in years. I'm so glad you like him, Dad. That really matters to me. I drove home with the window down, and the harbor wind coming through, thinking that perhaps I had been wrong to carry the quiet worry I had held for 2 years. The worry that Adrienne was pulling away. She had come home. She had brought him to me. It still meant something. The engagement dinner at the Vane home on Battery Street was 3 weeks later. My younger brother Clarence Dunn, who ran fleet operations for the company, and told me the truth about things even when I had not asked, drove me there himself. The house was on the south end of Battery Street, where old money families had built their grand homes facing the harbor before the Civil War. Tall white columns, double porches, azaleas along the iron fence. But I had spent 35 years reviewing building inspections and understanding what structures cost to maintain versus what they actually received. The roof above the east porch had sections of flashing that needed replacing. The second-floor window frames were peeling. The azalea beds suggested the grounds budget had been quietly cut. I filed all of it away without comment. Inside, Lenora Vane met us in the front parlor. 61 years old, dressed in pale blue silver hair, set precisely the posture of a woman who had been correcting other people's posture since childhood. She extended her hand with a smile that reached her eyes only partially. "Mr. Dunn, I understand you are in food distribution." "I own the company," I said pleasantly. "Dunn Harvest Foods. 35 years. How remarkable." She said the word the way people say it when they mean something closer to unexpected. I spent the rest of the evening watching my daughter. What I saw made the back of my neck tighten. Adrienne moved differently inside that house, straighter, more careful. She laughed at things Lenora said a half-beat sooner than the humor required. When Lenora interrupted her mid-sentence, Adrienne simply adjusted and continued in the new direction, as if she had chosen it herself. It was practiced. It was not new. On the drive home, Clary was quiet for the first 4 blocks. Then, "That woman looked at you like you were something tracked in on someone's shoe." She looked at Adrienne like she was an acquisition, he added. "Be careful, Fletcher, it is not simple." I looked out at the harbor lights on the dark water. "Let me see how it goes," I said. I should have listened right then and there. But hope is the most expensive thing a father carries, and I was not ready to put it down. I called Josephine Harker the morning after the Battery Street dinner and told her I was going to pay for my daughter's wedding. Every cent of it, $60,000. There was a pause on her end. Not surprise exactly, but the particular stillness of a woman running numbers she had not been asked to run yet. "How much have they budgeted?" she asked. "That is the budget," I said. I said it. Another pause. "Fletcher, you understand the Vane family will want to be involved in the planning. They are welcome to plan whatever they like," I said, "as long as I am the one signing the contracts." I heard Josephine exhale through her nose, the sound she made when she had already decided something and was simply waiting for the client to catch up. "Come to my office Thursday morning. Bring your checkbook and about 4 hours." Josephine's office occupied the second floor of a narrow building on Broad Street, 6 blocks from the courthouse and 2 blocks from the harbor. She had practiced law from that office for 22 years. The bookshelves ran floor to ceiling on 3 walls filled with volumes. She had actually read. Their spines cracked and margins written in her tight, precise handwriting. She was 52 years old, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of steady, unhurried manner that made opposing attorneys visibly uncomfortable when she walked into a room. She had been my attorney for 18 years, since the early days when I could barely afford her hourly rate, and she had taken me on anyway because, as she put it, she preferred clients who read the documents she sent them. On Thursday morning, she laid 4 vendor contracts across her conference table and walked me through each one. Charleston Grand Manor, a full-service event space on Meeting Street, with a reception capacity of 250 guests, $18,000, with a deposit of $9,000 due immediately. Magnolia Table, catering a company I knew professionally through our produce supply relationship, $14,000 for a seated dinner of 200 guests, with a deposit of $7,000. Bloom and Branch Florals on King Street, $8,000. The Palmetto String Quartet. 4 musicians Lenora had specified by name, $4,000. Charleston Elite Limousine for transport, $3,000. The remaining costs covered photography, the wedding planner's fee, and assorted incidentals. On every single signature line of every single document, I signed my name. Fletcher Dunn, sole responsible party. To be clear about what that phrase means legally, the sole responsible party is the individual who holds full financial and legal authority over the agreement. That person, and only that person, is obligated to pay, has the right to modify the terms, and carries the exclusive authority to cancel the contract and invoke any refund provisions. No other person, regardless of their connection to the event, can instruct a vendor to proceed, change, or stop. The contract runs entirely through that one signature. I signed everyone without hesitation. This was how I had done business for 35 years. Not because I suspected anyone of anything, because I had learned one hard lesson at a time that a signed name is the only promise that holds up when the conversation stops being pleasant. Josephine watched me sign the last page, then capped her red pen and sat back. She reviewed the fine print she had flagged with small yellow stickers. "Cancellation terms," she said. "Charleston Grand Manor requires 90 days written notice for a full deposit refund. Between 60 and 90 days, you recover 70%. Under 60 days, you forfeit the deposit. The catering and floral contracts have similar structures. The musicians require 90 days for any refund at all." "The wedding is 11 months out," I said. "Correct. Which means right now you are well outside every hard window." She looked at me directly over her reading glasses. "I am not suggesting you will need to use this. I am telling you because you should always know where the door is, Fletcher. That is true in every building you walk into and every contract you sign. Know where the door is." I stopped myself from saying something dismissive. Josephine did not offer information she did not mean to be useful. I had learned to listen when she flagged something, even when I did not understand yet why it needed flagging. "Understood," I said. She gathered everything into the green accordion folder and handed it across the table. "Keep these somewhere you can find them quickly. Not in your desk drawer under the delivery schedules." I took the folder home and set it on the corner of my desk. $60,000 committed. My daughter's name on a venue contract. The proudest investment I had ever made. I thought about Rosalind on the drive home. She would have cried through the whole ceremony and pretended she was not crying, and fooled absolutely no one. I drove past Battery Street. The Vane house was lit up on the second floor. I did not stop. The folder stayed on the corner of my desk for 11 months. It did not happen all at once. People always imagine it that way, after the fact, that there was a clear moment, a single conversation, a day they could point to and say, that was when things changed. But the truth, at least in my experience, is that these things happen the way a tide comes in. You look up from what you are doing, and the water is already at your ankles, and you cannot say precisely when it started rising. The first sign came 6 weeks after the contracts were signed. Lenora Vane called Adrian with thoughts about the floral arrangements. She had a preferred florist, not Bloom and Branch, the company already under contract, but a woman who did the flowers for the Southeastern Garden Society's annual luncheon, and who had, Lenora felt, a much more refined aesthetic sense. Adrian relayed it to me in the tone of someone reporting a minor administrative adjustment. "She just has some ideas, Dad. I thought we could incorporate them." I said that was fine. I did not call the florist. 2 weeks later, Lenora had thoughts about the menu. A month after that, about the table arrangements, the lighting, the processional music. Each new thought arrived framed as a gift, her experience, her taste, her generous willingness to apply 30 years of Charleston's social knowledge to my daughter's wedding day. And each time Adrian relayed it with the same slight brightness in her voice, the brightness of someone who believed she was being welcomed into something. The guest list was where I first felt the shift in my chest, not just discomfort, but a cold, settling weight. The original plan had room for 45 people from my side. My brother Clary and his family. 3 women who had worked for me since the early years, who had helped hold the company together through lean seasons and deserved to be in that room. Several neighbors who had known Adrian since grade school. People who had, in the plain language of it, actually been there. By month 4, that number had been reduced to 22. By month 6, to 14. Each reduction came with an explanation that sounded reasonable: in isolation, venue capacity, legacy guests, a complicated seating chart. I accepted each explanation and said nothing. I told myself this was Adrian's day, not mine. I told myself that so many times I stopped noticing how much it was costing me to keep saying it. The invitations went out in September. I received mine in the mail. The outer envelope read, "The Vane family cordially invites you to celebrate the marriage of Everett James Vane and Adrienne Renee Dunn." My name was not on it. Not as co-host. Not as the father of the bride. Not anywhere. I was listed as a guest on the inside card, second line after the names of Lenora and Gerald Vane. I put the invitation in the kitchen drawer and went back to work. The clearest moment came at the Dunn Harvest Foods annual company gathering in October, a cookout at Wanamaker County Park for my employees and their families. Adrian came with Everett. Two of his business colleagues from Crail Vane Capital came along as well, men in collared shirts, who held their cups of sweet tea like props they had been handed. I was talking to Darnell Webb near the grill when Adrian brought the two men over. She gestured toward me and said, "And this is Fletcher, a family friend, who has been incredibly supportive of our journey. He is in food distribution." They shook my hand and drifted away. Adrienne followed her shoulder, turning from me with a naturalness that made it worse. It was not calculated in that moment. It was habitual. She had said it the way you say things you have practiced until they no longer feel like lies. Darnell was quiet beside me for a count of 5. Then, without looking away from the grill, "She introduced you as a family friend." "I heard," I said. "She looked right at you and introduced you as a family friend. Her own father. At your company's event. On your land." His voice dropped. That was not nervousness. That was a choice. The word landed in my stomach like a stone. I looked out at the families spread across the park. My employees, their children running between the picnic tables. The ordinary, beautiful noise of people who had worked hard alongside each other for years. People who knew exactly who I was. "Let me see how it goes," I said. Darnell shook his head slowly and turned back to the grill. It would take 8 more months and one text message to understand what he had already seen standing there. That there is a permanent and irreversible difference between a daughter who is finding her way and a daughter who has decided her way does not include you. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, 2 months before the wedding date. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, the kind of stationery that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. My name and home address were written in ink by hand, not printed handwritten, in a cursive that suggested someone who had been taught penmanship as a serious subject. There was no return address, but the wax seal on the back was pressed with a small letter V. I opened it at my kitchen table before I had finished my first cup of coffee. Inside was a 12-page document with a cover letter on Vane Estate letterhead. The cover letter was signed by Lenora and written in the warm, practiced register of someone who wanted to appear thoughtful and generous. "Dear Fletcher," it began. "As Adrienne and Everett's wedding day approaches, I have been thinking a great deal about family, about what it means to truly care for one another across generations. As you become part of our extended family, I want to ensure that your future is protected in every meaningful way. Please find enclosed a lifetime care agreement prepared by our family's attorney, which outlines a comprehensive arrangement for your long-term well-being and security. I hope you will see this as the gesture of genuine affection it is intended to be." I read it twice. Then I set down my coffee cup and read the 12 pages. A lifetime care agreement, in its legitimate form, is a legal document sometimes used in family estate planning to formalize arrangements for the care of an aging relative. In its honest version, it sets out who will make medical decisions, who will manage finances, and where a person will live if they can no longer care for themselves independently. These agreements exist and can be genuinely useful. What Lenora's document contained was something considerably different. Buried in paragraph 8, beneath language about residential care options and medical proxies, was a provision that would have required me to assign a controlling interest in Dunn Harvest Foods to a family trust, the Vane Dunn Family Trust. As it was named in the document, a trust that did not yet exist, but whose proposed trustees were listed as Lenora Vane and Everett Vane. In plain terms, had I signed this document, the Vanes would have held legal authority over my company. Not advisory authority, controlling authority. The right to make operational decisions, enter contracts, and access financial accounts, all under the framing of managing my assets for my own protection. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. My coffee went cold. Morning light moved across the floor tiles, and I did not move with it. My hands rested flat on the document, and I was aware of a sensation I had not felt in a very long time, something that lived below anger, below grief, below even the particular exhaustion of a man who has been swallowing insults for 8 months. It was the cold, clarifying recognition of someone who has just discovered that the threat was never just social. It was financial. It was deliberate. And it had arrived through his daughter's address. I called Josephine Harker at 8:15 that morning and read her the relevant sections over the phone. The silence on her end lasted 4 full seconds. In 18 years, I had never heard Josephine Harker go quiet for 4 full seconds. "Bring it to my office," she said. Her voice had dropped into a register I recognized, the register she used in depositions, when she had already decided what she was going to do and was simply loading the chambers. "Bring it now, Fletcher. Do not tell Adrian you received it. Do not call the Vane family. Do not respond to the letter in any way. Just bring me the document." I was at her office on Broad Street within the hour. Josephine read all 12 pages without speaking. When she finished, she set the document down on her conference table and looked at me with an expression I could only describe as contained fury, the face of a woman who was very, very angry and had decided that anger would be most effective when it was organized. "This is elder financial exploitation," she said. "Under South Carolina Code, Section 43-35-10, it is unlawful for any person to exploit a vulnerable adult by obtaining control over their assets, real property, or business interests through deception, undue influence, or the misuse of a position of trust. This document, had you signed, it would have transferred controlling interest in your company to individuals who would have had legal standing to run it, drain it, or sell it all while presenting themselves as your caretakers." She tapped the document with one finger. "They did not send this to your attorney. They sent it directly to your home, written in language designed to sound like a gift." My jaw had tightened so hard that my back teeth ached. "What do I do?" I asked. "Nothing visible," Josephine said firmly. "You go back to work. You behave exactly as you have been behaving. You do not confront Lenora. You do not mention this to Adrian. You let them believe you did not notice or did not understand what you were looking at." She was already pulling a legal pad toward her, uncapping her pen. "I am going to prepare a formal report to the South Carolina Attorney General's office documenting this document, the parties involved, and the timeline. I will have it filed by end of week, and then we wait," she said. "But Fletcher, from this moment forward, you are no longer simply a father paying for a wedding. You are a party to an attempted financial fraud." She met my eyes directly. "Act accordingly." I drove back to the warehouse with both hands on the wheel and the particular clarity that comes when a thing you suspected turns out to be worse than you suspected. Something inside me had been waiting for a reason to stop being a good sport. Josephine had just handed me one 12 pages long and sealed with a wax letter V. I walked into the warehouse, found Darnell supervising a loading bay, and told him I needed him to pull the financial records for any Dunn subsidiary accounts that had been dormant for more than 18 months. He looked at me. Actually looked at me the way he did when he could hear a gear changing. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking," I said, like a businessman. The call came on a Thursday evening in early March, 6 weeks before the wedding. I was sitting in the kitchen, finishing a late dinner rice, and whatever was left in the refrigerator, the kind of meal a man makes when he has spent the day thinking about things that have nothing to do with food. My phone was on the counter, face up, and when Adrienne's name appeared, I felt the familiar pull in my chest that her calls always produced these days, part hope, part bracing. I had learned somewhere in the past several months to hold both feelings at the same time. "Hey, Dad," she sounded careful. That was the first thing I noticed, the particular careful quality that meant she had rehearsed the opening. "Hey, sweetheart," I said. "Everything okay? Everything is great. Really great. I just wanted to talk to you about something before you heard it from anyone else." A brief pause, the pause of someone finding a foothold. "There's been a small adjustment to the ceremony timeline." I set down my fork. "What kind of adjustment?" "So the processional. Lenora has a tradition in her family. The men on the groom's side escort the immediate family in a particular order, and her brother Gerald has always held the role of walking the bride." The words came faster now, smoother, the sound of something memorized finding its rhythm. "Everett's family places a lot of meaning in that specific tradition, and we really want to honor it. So Gerald is going to be the one to walk me to the altar." The kitchen went very still around me. I could hear the refrigerator running. I could hear a car moving slowly down Rutledge Avenue outside. "Say that again," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended, not because I had chosen quiet, but because the air had left my chest and I was working with what remained. "Gerald Vane is going to walk me and Dad. It's a family tradition. It doesn't change anything about Gerald Vane," I repeated. The name sat in my mouth like something I had not agreed to swallow. "A man I have met twice. He is going to walk my daughter down the aisle at her wedding. Dad, it's really not about you. Adrienne." My hand had tightened around the phone so hard that my knuckles had gone pale. I could feel the pressure of it traveling up my forearm. "Your mother made me promise her something. The last coherent thing she said to me before she died. Do you remember what I told you she asked for?" Silence on her end. Not the comfortable silence of a person thinking, the rigid silence of a person who knew exactly what was coming and had decided not to meet it. "She asked me to walk you down that aisle," I said. "She asked me with her last breath, Adrienne. I gave her my word. I know, Dad." And then she said it, the line that had been installed in her by someone else, spoken in her voice but carrying the cadence of a different woman's logic. "But this isn't really about a promise anymore. This is about what's best for the day and for the image we want to present. Lenora has been so clear about what the ceremony needs to look like, and honestly, Dad, think about it from Everett's side." "I'm thinking about it from your mother's side," I said. The line went quiet. After a moment, Adrienne said softer, and with something that might have been genuine discomfort underneath. "I'll let you think about it, okay? Just think about it." We hung up, and I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. I did not eat. I did not move to the living room or turn on a light as the kitchen darkened around me. I sat with my hands flat on the table, the same table where I had helped Adrienne with her science projects, where she had eaten breakfast every morning for 12 years, where I had told her about Rosalind's death on a Sunday afternoon when she was 6 years old, and she had not fully understood, and I had not fully known how to explain, and I stared at the wall and felt something I had not felt in decades. Not anger. Anger would have been easier. What I felt was a grief so specific and so old that it had a shape to it, the shape of a hospital room in March 25 years ago, a hand going cold in mine, a voice fading out on a request I had promised to carry. I heard a knock at the front door 40 minutes later. Darnell Webb walked in without waiting for a second invitation, the way he had been walking into my house for 20 years, because a man who has known you long enough does not stand on ceremony when the lights are off at 7 in the evening and your truck is in the driveway. He found me at the kitchen table, switched on the overhead light without comment, and pulled out the chair across from me. He looked at my face for exactly 1 second. Then he said, "What did she do?" I told him, all of it. Gerald Vane, the family tradition, the image. Think about it from Everett's side. Darnell listened without interrupting, which was itself a thing he almost never did. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and dragged a hand across his face, and for a moment, he looked every one of his 58 years. Ma Fletcher. He said, "You have been paying $60,000 for the privilege of being told in new and creative ways that you do not belong there. Every month there's a new reason. Every month you find something to call it that isn't what it is." He leaned forward, and his voice dropped into the register that meant he had stopped choosing his words carefully. "Your wife asked you to walk that girl down the aisle. She asked you dying. And Adrian took that promise and handed it to a stranger named Gerald because Lenora Vane decided it looked better. And you are sitting here in the dark, trying to find a way to call that something other than what it is." My throat worked. I looked down at my hands on the table. "What do you want me to do, Darnell?" My voice came out rough, scraped, thin. "I want you to stop making it easy for them." He stood up, pushed his chair back. "I want you to remember that Rosalind did not ask you to be invisible. She asked you to show up. There is a difference." He picked up his jacket from the chair back. "Think about that tonight." After he left, I sat alone for another hour. Then I picked up my phone and called Adrienne. I thought about it," I told her when she answered. "Give me a few more days, sweetheart. Just a few more days." She agreed, her voice softening with what I think was real relief. She still wanted me to say yes. Some part of her still needed me to make it easier for everyone by accepting less. I set the phone down and looked at the kitchen wall. 3 weeks later, she sent the text. "Here is what I know happened between 1:52 in the morning and 3:15 a.m. on that Thursday in April. Because Josephine Harker told me afterward in detail, because I asked. And because a man who sends a lawyer into battle at 2 in the morning has every right to know what the battle looked like." When I finished telling her everything, the text, the folder, my reply, all of it compressed into 4 minutes of straight talking. Josephine did not offer sympathy, and she did not offer opinions. She said, "I will call you back before 4. Do not contact anyone." And she hung up and went to work. Her home office, where she keeps a second set of every active client file, is on the 3rd floor of her house on Trad Street, 7 blocks from my front door. She was at her desk with the done wedding contracts open in front of her within 6 minutes of our call ending, cross-referencing the cancellation clauses against the calendar with the particular focused intensity of someone who had been a practicing attorney for long enough that the hour on the clock had stopped being a factor in how she thought. She called Charleston Grand Manor first. Charleston Grand Manor. The venue holding the reception booking operates an after-hours emergency line as a condition of their event liability insurance policy, a common requirement for large event spaces in South Carolina, where the gap between a vendor problem at midnight and a ceremony at noon can mean the difference between resolution and catastrophe. The line is staffed by rotating event managers. The woman who answered that night was Pauline Dretsch, who had managed events at Charleston Grand Manor for 16 years and who was by her own account not easily surprised by late calls. Charleston Grand Manor Events Line, Pauline said. Good morning. Josephine's voice, I am told, was entirely level. My name is Josephine Harker. I am the attorney of record for Fletcher Dunn, the sole signatory and sole responsible party on your venue contract for the April 23rd booking. I am calling to formally invoke the cancellation clause as specified in Section 7.2 of that contract on behalf of my client, effective immediately. There was a pause. Can you give me the contract reference number? Josephine gave it from memory. She had memorized it from the copy in her file the moment she pulled the folder. Mr. Dunn is the only name on that contract, Pauline said, and there was a new quality in her voice, careful assessing. She was pulling the file on her end. Correct, Josephine said. He is the sole responsible party. No other individual has contractual authority to modify or continue this booking. I am sending you written notice via email while we speak. The timestamp will confirm this notification was given within the 90-day cancellation window, which entitles my client to a full refund of the deposit under Section 7.2a. The email went out at 2:04 in the morning. Josephine sent it from her laptop, while still on the phone, composed in under 40 seconds, precise and complete. Pauline Dretch was quiet for a moment. Then she said something Josephine did not expect. Is this Fletcher Dunn of Dunn Harvest Foods? Josephine confirmed it. His company supplies produce to 3 of our restaurant accounts, Pauline said. Her voice had shifted, not warmer exactly, but with a different kind of weight to it. The weight of a person who understands that a name is not abstract. I know who he is. Another pause. I will process the cancellation. Written confirmation of the refund timeline will go to Mr. Dunn's address of record by the close of business tomorrow. Thank you, Josephine said. Is he all right? Pauline asked. It was, Josephine told me later, an unexpected question at 2 a.m. from a venue manager she had never spoken to. He will be, Josephine said, and moved to the next call. Magnolia Table Catering had an after-hours number listed in the contract for exactly this kind of event emergency. Josephine reached the on-call coordinator at 2:19 in the morning, gave the same notification, sent the same time-stamped email confirmation while still on the line. The coordinator was less conversational than Pauline Dretch, and more immediately compliant. The words, sole responsible party and attorney of record, had a clarifying effect on people Josephine had found, regardless of the hour. Bloom and Branch Florals at 2:31. The Palmetto String Quartet at 2:44. Their contact was a personal cell phone belonging to the quartet's first violinist, a man named Roger, who answered with considerable confusion and then with resigned professionalism when the situation was explained. Charleston Elite Limousine at 2:58. By 3:15 in the morning, every vendor contract connected to the April 23rd event had received formal written cancellation notice, time-stamped and attorney certified from the only human being on the planet who had the legal authority to send it. The deposits, $60,000 of them, spread across 5 vendors, had begun the administrative process of reversing course and heading back toward the account of Fletcher Dunn's sole responsible party. Josephine sent me a text at 3:17. It read, Done. Every vendor has formal notice time-stamped tonight. Your refund processing begins at normal business hours. Sleep, Fletcher. I did not sleep. I sat in the chair by the window with the green folder in my lap and watched the harbor lights through the glass, and I thought about Rosalind and about the year that had just ended and about what I had just done and whether I was certain I had done the right thing. I was certain. At 4:28 in the morning, Josephine told me later, Pauline Dretch placed a call to another number, a number that was not mine. It was Adrienne's. Before I tell you what she said when she called at 4:30 in the morning, drop the number 1 in the comments right now. Just a 1. So I know you are still here with me. One thing before we continue, portions of this story carry fictional elements woven in for depth and storytelling. If that is not the content you came for, this is a good moment to step away, no hard feelings. For everyone staying, keep listening. The phone lit up at 4:30 in the morning. I had not moved from the chair by the window since Josephine's text arrived at 3:17. I had watched the harbor through the glass as it sat dark, and then began almost imperceptibly to lighten at the edges, the way Charleston mornings do in April, not a sudden thing, but a slow, reluctant concession of darkness, as if the sky were deciding one shade at a time whether it was ready to become day. I saw Adrian's name on the screen. I felt my chest tighten the way it had tightened every time that name appeared for the past 8 months, the reflex of a father who had been hoping for something and bracing for something else simultaneously. I let the phone ring twice before I answered, not to punish her, to find the floor under my feet before I spoke. Dad. Her voice broke on that single syllable split clean in half. Dad, Pauline called me, the venue woman. She said you canceled. She said the whole booking is gone. The wedding is in 3 weeks. Dad, how could you? She was crying now, words tumbling out between sharp, unsteady breaths, the kind of crying that comes when a person's chest has seized up and speech becomes a physical effort. How could you do this? Do you understand what you have done? 3 weeks, Dad. 3 weeks. I kept my voice level. I had been sitting with this conversation for over an hour, turning it over, finding where I stood on every question before she could ask it. I understand exactly what I have done, I said. I did what I told you I would do. And you said you would think about it. You said, I thought about it, I said. I have been thinking about it for 8 months, Adrian. I thought about it when your guest list went from 45 people to 14. I thought about it when the invitations went out with your mother's name nowhere on them. I thought about it in October, standing at a grill, watching you turn your back on a room full of people who had known you since childhood. I stopped, took a breath. I thought about it last night when I read your message. A sound came out of her that was somewhere between a sob and something sharper, not entirely grief, not entirely anger, pulled tight between both. That is not fair, she said, her voice cracking higher. That is not fair, and you know it. There is a difference between the planning decisions and this. You cannot blow up my wedding because you didn't get everything you wanted. I wanted to walk you down the aisle. My voice stayed quiet, but something in the quiet had weight to it. That was the only thing I asked for Adrian. Not a speaking role, not a seat at the planning table, not my name on the invitations, even though I was paying for every line on every page of them. I asked for 1 walk, 8 steps. The thing your mother spent the last of her strength asking me to do for her. The crying stopped abruptly. Or rather, it did not stop. She was still crying, I could hear it. But the words did, and what came through in their place was a different sound entirely. The sound of a person who has just had something land on them that they did not know how to absorb. Don't, she whispered. Don't bring Mom into this. She is already in this, I said. She has been in this from the moment you told Gerald Vane he could take her place. I am not saying it to wound you. I am saying it because it is the truth, and you know it is the truth. And I think some part of you has known it was wrong for longer than you have been willing to admit to yourself. You are being selfish. The accusation came out thick, muffled, the voice of someone repeating a position they had been given rather than arrived at. You are making this about yourself, about a chair, about a walk, about your ego. I am making this about what I will and will not accept, I said. That is not the same thing as selfishness. I spent 8 months accepting things I should not have accepted because I loved you more than I loved my own dignity. Last night, those two things finally stopped being compatible. I felt the words settle as I said them, solid and certain. I did not do this to you, Adrian. I declined to do it to myself. There is a permanent difference between those two things, and I need you to hear it. She was sobbing now, deep and uneven, and it drove a spike of pain through my sternum the way her crying always had since she was a small child. Some reflexes do not age out of a parent no matter what the child has done. My free hand gripped the arm of the chair and I held on. Josephine has already started the refund process. I said quieter now. The vendors have their notices. What happens next with the wedding arrangements is between you and the Vane family. I paused. I hope you will think carefully, sweetheart, about what it tells you that this problem now belongs entirely to them. She did not answer that. What I heard instead was the sound of her trying to get her breathing under control, 3 ragged attempts, a 4th that came close, a 5th that steadied just enough for her to speak. I have to go, she said. Her voice had changed, still broken, still wet with tears, but underneath it something had shifted very slightly, a loosening almost like a thread going slack. I did not know what to call it then. I would understand it better weeks later. Okay, I said. I love you. That has not changed. It will not change. She hung up without responding. I sat in the chair until the sky outside had decided it was morning. Then I got up, made coffee, pulled on my work clothes, and drove to the warehouse. I had 80 employees who needed their delivery routes confirmed by 7 a.m. The Vane family could face whatever they needed to face. I had a company to run. The morning route check ran north on I-26, which meant Clary rode with me most Thursdays. My younger brother, Clarence. Clary, to everyone who knew him longer than 10 minutes, had joined Dunn Harvest Foods 11 years ago as a route driver when his own delivery business had folded in the recession, and he had rebuilt himself inside my company, the way competent people do when they are given the room to methodically, without fanfare. Until one day, he was running fleet operations for the entire enterprise, and the drivers called him before they called anyone else when something went wrong on the road. He was 54 years old, 6 feet and change, with the same dark eyes and stubborn jaw our father had, and he had a habit of saying the most necessary thing in the fewest possible words, which was, in my opinion, the most useful quality a person could have. He was working through a route manifest on a clipboard when my phone rang at 8:47. I glanced at the screen and felt something move through my shoulders. Not tension exactly, but the deliberate settling of a man who knew what was coming and had decided how he was going to receive it. I put the call on speaker and set the phone in the cup holder between us. "Lenora," I said. "Fletcher." Her voice came through warm and measured, the voice of a woman who had spent 60 years in Charleston social circles and understood that tone was everything in the first 30 seconds of a difficult conversation. "I am so glad you picked up. I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding, and I wanted to reach you before anything goes any further." "There has not been a misunderstanding," I said. I kept my eyes on the highway, and my voice the same temperature as the morning air outside the windshield. A pause. The warmth in her voice recalibrated slightly. "Fletcher, I understand you are upset. I understand that the planning process has been challenging, but you have to appreciate the position you have put this family in. The invitations are out. People have travel arrangements. The Vane name is attached to this event in ways that cannot simply be undone overnight." Another pause, longer. "I think if we sit down together and talk through—" "No," I said. The word sat in the cab of the truck between Clary and me. Clean, complete, unqualified. Clary looked up slowly from his clipboard, and I saw the corner of his mouth move in a way that was not quite a smile but was something in that family. "I beg your pardon," Lenora said. The warmth had dropped several degrees the way a room temperature drops when a window is opened in winter. "No." I said again the same way the second time as the first without variation or apology. "I will not be reinstating anything, Lenora. The vendors have their cancellation notices. The deposits are being returned to my accounts. The event is canceled." I let that sit for one beat. Was there something else? The composure came apart in a way that I suspected she would have preferred it not to. Her voice climbed past its careful register, past its social armor, into something thinner and more truthful. "Do you have any idea what you have done to this family? Do you have any idea what people will say? The Vane name has been attached to this wedding for nearly a year. Our friends, our business associates, people who matter in this city, they all know. And now they are going to know that it collapsed, because the bride's father threw a tantrum over walking my daughter down the aisle," I said. "That is what this is over, Lenora. Just so we are naming it accurately." My voice had not risen. It did not need to. "Your family wanted my money and not my presence. I decided to keep the money. I understand that creates a problem for you. It is your problem now." I reached over and ended the call. The truck moved north on the highway. The radio was off. Wind moved past the windows. Clary set his clipboard down on his knee and looked out the passenger window for a moment. Then he said, 3 years. He said it the way a man says something he has been waiting to say for exactly that long. "What did you hear?" I asked. "All of it." He turned back to the manifest. "Good." We drove for another 4 minutes without speaking, which with Clary counted as a full conversation. Then his own phone buzzed against the seat. He looked at it, read something, and his expression shifted, the small, specific shift of a man who has just received information that changes the shape of something he was already thinking about. "What?" I said. "Got a message from Marcus Webb, one of our route drivers knows people in the wholesale lending market. Says Dale Pruitt's people have been making calls this morning. Charleston's lending community talks fast when a large deal collapses overnight and nobody's explaining why. Word moves before the paperwork does. Looking for anyone connected to the Vane family. Trying to track down collateral on a loan." I looked at him. "Pruitt." "Dale Pruitt," Clary confirmed. "Wholesale private lender. Operates out of North Charleston, been in the market for 20 years. Runs hard money loans, short-term high-rate private lending, all legal under South Carolina statute, all documented, no favors and no patience." He set the phone face down on the seat. "Sounds like the Vanes borrowed against expected income from the wedding. Gift projections, vendor rebates, maybe the catering deposits they thought you'd fund. All of it contingent on the wedding happening and the cash flowing. A hard money loan, for anyone unfamiliar, is a private short-term loan backed by an asset rather than a credit history. Legal in South Carolina, commonly used in real estate and event financing, and structured with terms that become very uncomfortable very quickly when the expected cash flow they were written against disappears without warning." I looked back at the highway. "They borrowed on the assumption that my $60,000 would make everything work," I said. "That is what it looks like," Clary said. He picked the clipboard back up. "Which means right now Dale Pruitt is looking for money that does not exist from people who do not have it, because the one person who did have it just stopped cooperating." He ran his pencil down a column of numbers. "How much do you figure they owe him?" "I don't know yet," I said. Clary nodded slowly. "You will," he said. He was not wrong. Here is what happened inside the Vane house on Battery Street in the days that followed my $60,000 walking out of the wedding. I did not witness any of it directly. I pieced it together later from what Adrian eventually told me, from what Clary heard through his contacts, and from the way certain things became clear once the full picture was visible. I am telling it now because you need to understand what Adrian walked through before you can understand who she was when she finally came to find me. The morning after my call with Lenora, the Battery Street house was in what I can only describe as organized panic. Lenora was on the phone for most of it, calling the wedding planner, calling the few vendors she could reach, directly calling people whose names appeared in the society pages and whose opinions she valued more than she valued honesty. She had a version of events ready for each of them, a narrative in which the collapse of the wedding was a mutual decision, a private family matter, something that had nothing to do with money or the Vane family's standing. She delivered it smoothly because Lenora Vane had been delivering smooth narratives her entire adult life. Everett found Adrienne on the second-floor porch overlooking the harbor. She was standing at the railing with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold, looking out at the water the way people look at things when they are not really seeing them. She heard him come out, but did not turn around. He sat down on the porch bench and was quiet for long enough that she finally turned to look at him. What she saw on his face, she told me later, was something she had never seen there before. Not the practiced ease, not the social confidence. Just a man sitting with something he had been carrying too long and had run out of the energy to carry. "How bad is it?" she asked. Everett pressed his hands together between his knees and looked at the floor of the porch. "The house is in foreclosure proceedings," he said. His voice was flat, stripped of everything performative. Foreclosure is what happens when a property owner has defaulted on their mortgage payments to the point where the lender initiates legal action to reclaim the property. We have been in that process for 8 months. My mother has been managing the notices, keeping them from the mail, intercepting the calls, because she believed the wedding would generate enough liquidity to restructure. He stopped. "There is no other money, Adrian. The accounts are essentially empty. The investments my father left are gone. What you saw here, the house, the dinners, the silver, that was the last of a performance that ran out of funding years ago." Adrienne stared at him. The coffee mug was still in her hands. Later, she told me her fingers had gone completely cold, not from the air, but from the inside, the kind of cold that starts in your chest and moves outward. "You needed my father's money," she said. Not a question. "Yes," Everett said. That was part of why." She heard herself say it and felt the truth of it in a way that was physical, like a step taken and the floor not being there. "You needed someone with actual capital, someone whose money was real." He did not deny it. He had the decency, at least, to not dress it up. "I thought it could work," he said, which was not the same as saying he had loved her, and they both understood that. She went inside. She did not slam the door. She walked through the bedroom with the water stain on the plaster ceiling that Lenora had covered with a painting, and sat down at the writing desk in the corner where Everett's laptop was open from the night before. She did not plan to look. Her hand moved the trackpad to wake the screen, and the email window that had been open when he closed the lid was still open. The name at the top of the most recent thread was Diane Calloway. The thread was 14 months long. Adrienne read it. Not all of it. She did not have the stomach for all of it. But enough. Enough to understand that this had begun 3 months before Everett introduced himself to her at the Gibbs Museum fundraiser, that it had continued without interruption through the engagement announcement, through every planning dinner, through every weekend she had spent at Battery Street, learning Lenora's preferences for flower arrangements and table settings. 14 months. It had run parallel to everything underneath, everything invisible to her, because she had been looking in the wrong direction. She closed the laptop. She stood up. Her legs felt uncertain under her, the particular unsteadiness of a body that has absorbed a shock the mind has not yet processed. She pressed one hand against the desk surface and breathed in and in again, and then finally out a long exhale that shook at the end. She picked up her car keys. She did not speak to Everett on the way out. She did not speak to Lenora, who was still on the phone in the parlor, still constructing the narrative. She walked out of the Battery Street house and got into her car and drove. She drove for 40 minutes without direction, through downtown Charleston, across the Cooper River Bridge, back again. At some point, her car turned north, and when she finally stopped, she was parked on the street outside Charleston City Market. The lights were off. It was 9 o'clock at night. She sat there for a long time. My phone buzzed with a text from Darnell at 9:17. It said, "Her truck has been parked outside the market for 40 minutes. Thought you should know." I read it. I looked at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "Leave the side door unlocked." I did not go out to her. Not that night. Some things a person has to sit with alone first, and I had been a father long enough to know the difference between a child who needs rescuing and a child who needs the quiet to hear themselves think. That night I believed she needed the quiet. She came to the warehouse on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 weeks after the wedding that never happened. I was at my desk in the small glass-walled office at the back of the main floor, working through a vendor payment schedule, when Darnell knocked twice on the doorframe and said without particular inflection, "Your daughter is here." I set down my pen. I took one breath, the deliberate kind. Then I said, "Send her in." The first thing I noticed was the clothes. She was wearing a gray pullover I recognized from 5 or 6 years ago, the kind of thing she used to wear on Saturdays when she helped me run errands before the vain years had replaced her weekend wardrobe with things that needed dry cleaning. Her hair was down and simple. No statement jewelry. She looked in the plainest possible terms like herself, or like the version of herself that existed before she started editing that self for someone else's approval. I noticed it immediately. I also noticed that she had almost certainly chosen the clothes on purpose. Dad. Her voice came in soft, uncertain at the edges. Her eyes were red in the way of someone who had been crying on and off for 2 weeks, and she held her hands together in front of her. The fingers interlocked the knuckles, pressing white against each other. I was hoping we could talk. "Of course," I said. "Sit down. You want coffee?" She shook her head and sat across from me. For a moment, she looked around the office at the framed route maps on the wall, at the delivery schedule board, at the photograph above the filing cabinet of the original Dunn Harvest Foods truck. Her throat moved. "I have been doing a lot of thinking," she said. "About everything. About how things got so far from where they should have been." Her voice steadied as she went, finding its footing in a script she had been rehearsing, I suspected, for most of the drive over. "I know I hurt you. I know I made choices I cannot take back. And I am not here to pretend that didn't happen." She looked at me directly. Her eyes were earnest. They were also working very hard to be earnest, which is a different thing. "I just need to figure out how to move forward. I need to rebuild. I was hoping you might consider helping me with a startup situation. A small loan, maybe. Just enough to get me on my feet while I figure out next steps." I leaned back in my chair. I kept my face open and warm, the face I use when I am in a negotiation, and I want the other side to keep talking. "Tell me more," I said. "What kind of situation are you thinking?" She talked for 12 minutes. She was good at it. She described the loan as being for personal stabilization, for covering living costs, while she figured out a new direction for giving herself breathing room to make clear-headed decisions. She did not mention the Vane family. She did not mention Dale Pruitt. She did not say the words I was listening for, which were, "This money is to pay a debt that belongs to people who used me as their financial instrument." But the numbers she mentioned, The amount, the timeline, the urgency fit the shape of that debt, the way a key fits a lock. Let me think about it, I told her when she had finished. Come back Thursday, let me look at some numbers. She stood up and hugged me, and I held on for a moment. Held her the way I always had, the way fathers hold daughters when they are not sure how much of what they feel is wisdom, and how much is just wanting it to be simpler than it is. She smelled like the same shampoo she had used since she was in high school. That detail cost me something I did not show. She said goodbye to Darnell on her way out. He said goodbye back, and his voice was perfectly pleasant. And the moment the warehouse side door closed behind her, he walked directly to my office doorway and leaned against the frame with his arms crossed. She came for the money, he said. Not for you. I know, I said. He looked at me for a moment, the particular look of a man checking to make sure his friend has actually landed on solid ground and is not just performing steadiness. You recorded it, he said. It was not a question. Josephine told me to set it up 3 months ago, I said. South Carolina is a one-party consent state, which means that a person who is part of a conversation is legally permitted to record that conversation without notifying the other party. Josephine had me install a system on my office phone and my cell the week after the nursing home document arrived. Everything since that morning, every conversation I have been part of, is on file. Darnell absorbed this without changing his expression, which was itself an expression. Everything, he said. Everything, I confirmed, including today. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Does Adrian know a no? I said. And she would not have any legal basis to object if she did, which she will not, because Josephine has already reviewed the applicable statute and confirmed that the recordings are entirely within the law. I picked up my pen and looked back at the payment schedule on my desk. The recordings are not for Adrian. Darnell straightened up from the doorframe. He had the look of a man who had just understood that a chess game he had been watching was several moves further along than he had realized. Then who are they for? He asked. I set the pen down again. There is someone at Crail Vein Capital, I said, who does not yet know the full nature of their business partner's activities outside the office. When Josephine decides the time is right, they will know. Darnell said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, how long have you had this mapped out? Long enough, I said. He shook his head, once a slow, single motion that carried something that was not quite disbelief and not quite admiration, but landed somewhere between the two. Then he went back to the loading dock without another word because there was work to do, and he was not a man who let understanding a thing become a reason to stop working. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and looked at the red folder Josephine had left there on her last visit. I was almost ready. Before I open that red folder and show you what Josephine found inside, comment the word folder right now. I want to see you here before I drop this because what comes next changes everything you thought you knew about this story. A note: this story includes fictional elements crafted for reflection and entertainment. Names, places, and some details have been shaped for this telling. If you would rather step away, now is the moment. For those still here, you will want to hear this. Josephine Harker arrived at the warehouse at 8:15 in the morning, which told me 2 things before she opened her mouth. First, she had driven straight from home. Her coffee was in a gas station cup, not the ceramic mug she kept at her Broad Street desk. Second, and more importantly, she was carrying the red folder. In 18 years of working together, Josephine had brought 2 kinds of folders to our meetings. The green ones meant work in motion, contracts being built, matters still fluid, situations that could still tip in any direction. The red ones meant something else entirely. The red ones meant it was already over. The other side just did not know it yet. She set the folder on the main work table and opened it without preamble. Clary, who had been at the far end of the floor reviewing a maintenance log, walked over without being asked and stood at the other end of the table. He had the instincts of a man who recognized when a room had changed temperature. Palmetto Agricultural Finance, LLC. Josephine said, spreading documents across the surface. A limited liability company registered in the state of Delaware, incorporated 13 months ago. Its stated business purpose is agricultural and commercial lending in the southeastern United States. She set one document on top. Its sole member and owner is Dunn Harvest Foods Incorporated. Clary set his maintenance log down on the nearest shelf. To explain how this works in practical terms, Josephine continued, when a creditor, a bank, a private lender, any financial institution holds a loan that is underperforming or heading toward default, they have the option to sell that loan to a third party at a discount. The third party pays less than what the borrower actually owes, but in exchange becomes the legal creditor. They now hold the right to collect the full debt. The original lender is paid out and steps away. She placed another document beside the first. Over the course of the past 13 months, Palmetto Agricultural Finance purchased outstanding debt obligations from 4 separate creditors who had lent money to the Vane family or to entities connected to the Vane estate. The face value of the combined debt is $340,000. Palmetto acquired it for approximately $190,000. She looked across the table at me steadily. What? The Vanes have been making partial monthly payments to Palmetto, believing it to be an independent regional agricultural lender. They have made those payments for 11 months without knowing who was on the other end of the account. Lenora handled all financial matters personally. Everett, I learned later, had been kept almost as ignorant of the family's true situation as Adrian had. It was the kind of household where the person managing the decline was also the last one willing to name it. Clary turned his head toward me slowly, the way a man turns when he is making sure he heard something correctly. They have been paying you, he said. Not a question. A statement arriving with some force behind it. Every month they have been paying you. The whole time. They have been paying a company I own, yes, I said. Through a Delaware LLC structure which is standard business practice and entirely legal. Delaware is commonly used for subsidiary registration because its corporate records are not publicly searchable the way South Carolina records are. Josephine structured Palmetto the morning after the Battery Street dinner 13 months ago. I had asked her to find every underperforming loan connected to the Vane family. Within 6 weeks, she had found the first one. I want to be clear about what I was thinking. At that time, I was not certain I would ever need Palmetto. I set it up because 35 years of business had taught me that preparation and hope were not mutually exclusive, that a man could walk into an engagement dinner genuinely wanting to be wrong about what he saw and still be wise enough to build a door on the way out. Clary exhaled through his nose. It was a short, controlled sound that carried about 4 different things inside it, none of which were surprise because Clary had never had the luxury of being surprised by what money could do in the wrong hands or the right ones. Josephine placed a second set of documents beside the first. The residence on Rutledge Avenue, she said. Fletcher's home. What about it? Clary asked. 2 years ago, Fletcher transferred the property into the Charleston Historic Preservation Trust by recording a permanent preservation easement with Charleston County. Josephine folded her hands on the table. A preservation easement is a legal instrument that places binding permanent restrictions on a property in exchange for its formal recognition as a historic asset. Under the South Carolina Historic Preservation Act, once that easement is recorded, it is irrevocable. The property cannot be sold, cannot be mortgaged against, cannot be seized by creditors, and cannot be reached by any civil judgment brought against the owner personally. The house exists legally in a category that no financial or legal pressure can touch. The loading dock at the far end of the warehouse made its regular sounds, pallets, shifting a gate rolling up, a driver calling out a route number. The sounds of a company operating normally on a Thursday morning, unbothered by any of this. Clary looked at me for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone quiet and deliberate. When you started buying their debt, he said, "Did you know you were going to need to?" I thought about that question honestly before I answered it. "No," I said. I started because I recognized what I was looking at when I walked into that house. I recognized a family that had built an identity around money they no longer had. And I recognized that they were planning to solve that problem with someone else's resources. I looked down at the documents. I did not know Adrian would be the vehicle. I did not know any of the specifics. I just knew that the day Lenora Vane decided in the time it takes to shake a man's hand, that she understood exactly what he was worth. I knew that I was going to need to understand exactly what she was worth in return. "So you spent 13 months finding out," Clary said. "Josephine spent 13 months finding out," I said. "I just paid her to." Josephine allowed herself the smallest movement at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but the expression of a woman who had done her job extremely well and was willing to have that acknowledged by someone who had noticed. She closed the red folder and placed her hands on top of it. "One move left," she said. "The recordings," I said. "Or I have identified the appropriate recipient at Crail Vane Capital." She tapped the folder once. "One email, when you say so." I looked at her across the work table. 13 months of careful, unglamorous, precise work. Every document filed correctly. Every structure set up cleanly. Every move made in full compliance with the law, which was the only way I knew how to do anything that mattered. "Thursday," I said. Josephine picked up the red folder and her gas station coffee and walked out without another word, because she was not a woman who needed the last word when the last word had already been spoken. Montgomery Crail had built Crail Vane Capital over 23 years, from a two-man advisory firm into one of the mid-sized investment management companies that quietly moved significant money through the southeastern corridor. Not the flashiest operation in Charleston, but the kind that institutional clients trusted precisely because it was not flashy. He was 61 years old, had a reputation for reading a situation faster than the situation expected to be read, and had a standing rule in his office that nothing that arrived in his inbox before 9 in the morning was urgent enough to interrupt his first cup of coffee. He broke that rule on a Thursday when he opened an email from a sender he did not recognize, Harker Legal Group, at 8:42. The subject line read, "Confidential matters pertaining to E. Vane and Crail Vane Capital Operations." I know what the email contained, because Josephine prepared it in my office on Wednesday evening and showed it to me before she sent it. It included 3 audio files, selected excerpts from recordings made over the previous 3 months under South Carolina's one-party consent statute, which permits any participant in a conversation to record it without informing the other parties. The recordings documented Adrian discussing how to manage my access to the wedding's financial decisions. Adrian describing the lifetime care agreement strategy in language that was considerably more direct than the document's framing suggested, and one recording, the most damaging of them, in which Everett Vane discussed Crail Vane Capital's client accounts with Adrian in terms that suggested he had been sharing confidential investment information outside the firm in ways that would concern any compliance officer who heard them. The email also included a cover letter from Josephine, 2 paragraphs precise and entirely without drama, explaining the provenance of the recordings, the legal basis for their collection, and the name of the sole party on whose behalf they were being provided. Fletcher Dunn, sole responsible party. Montgomery Crail listened to all 3 recordings before 9 o'clock. By 9:30, he had called his compliance director. By 10:15, Everett Vane had been summoned to the senior conference room on the 4th floor of the Crail Vane offices on East Bay Street. By 11 o'clock, Everett Vane had been suspended pending a formal internal review. His access credentials to all firm systems had been revoked, and his personal accounts tied to the firm's managed portfolios had been frozen pending that review. Suspended, not fired outright. That distinction mattered legally because a firm of Crail Vane's standing moved carefully when it moved at all. But the practical effect was the same. Everett walked out of that building at 11:15 on a Thursday morning in May with a box of his personal desk items and a letter from the firm's legal team that he was not to contact clients' access firm accounts or represent himself as affiliated with Crail Vane Capital in any capacity during the review period. He called Adrian from the parking garage at 11:22. She told me about this call much later, and I am telling it now exactly as she described it. His voice, she said, was unlike any version of it she had heard before, stripped of the ease that had always characterized it, stripped of the careful confidence he wore the way other men wore expensive watches. What came through the phone was something raw. "They fired me," he said. The words came out thick, misshapen, the voice of a man who had not yet decided whether he was angry or frightened and had landed somewhere between both. "Montgomery has recordings, Adrienne, audio recordings, of conversations I had. Some of them were with you." A pause that had a shaking quality to it. Where did recordings come from? Adrienne said she did not answer immediately. Not because she did not know, she knew the moment he said the word recordings, she knew, with the same cold certainty, she had felt reading Diane Calloway's emails on that crumbling Battery Street porch. She knew where they had come from, and approximately when they had been made, and what they likely contained. What stopped her from answering was something she had not anticipated. She was not angry. She had expected to be angry. Instead, what she felt standing in the kitchen of the apartment she had rented after leaving Battery Street was something closer to relief. Not a comfortable relief, not a pleasant one, but the specific relief of a person who has been holding a complicated lie together for a long time and has just watched someone else remove the need to keep holding it. "I have to go," she told Everett. He said her name twice more each time with a different quality, once demanding, once something approaching, desperate. She ended the call. She sat in the kitchen for 20 minutes. Then she got her car keys and drove. Darnell texted me at 2:17 in the afternoon. His message said, "Her truck is back outside the market. Been there an hour." I read it at my desk. I set the phone face down. Then I picked it up again and read it a second time. I thought about that night 2 weeks earlier when I had told him to leave the side door unlocked and had not gone out to her, the decision to let her sit alone with the quiet she needed. This time I typed back differently. "Tell her I am coming out." I walked out of the warehouse and across the small lot to the street where her truck was parked. She was sitting in the driver's seat with the window down and both hands resting in her lap, not on her phone, not doing anything at all, except sitting in the May afternoon, with the sounds of the market moving around her vendors, calling to each other. The clatter of carts on the stone walkway. The particular smell of Charleston in late spring salt and flowers and something faintly sweet that had been true of this street since I was 28 years old with a broom in my hands. She saw me coming. Her face moved in a way that was not quite a wince and not quite relief, but held something of both. I stopped at the passenger side window. "You want to come in?" I asked. "I have coffee." She looked at me for a moment, a real look, not the practiced look she had worn when she came to ask for the loan, but the look of someone who was genuinely uncertain what they deserved. Then she nodded once and reached for the door handle. We went inside. The man Dale Pruitt sent to Battery Street on a Monday morning was not loud. He did not threaten. He did not need to. He was a trim, middle-aged man in a plain gray suit who arrived at the Vane house at 9 o'clock and knocked twice with the specific patient knock of someone who had knocked on many doors for many years and had learned that the people behind them were always home regardless of what they told themselves. When Lenora opened the door, he handed her an envelope and told her in the polite and entirely inflexible tone of someone delivering a contractual obligation, rather than a personal opinion, that Pruitt Capital Lending required a response on the outstanding balance within 7 business days, and that if no response was received, the firm would proceed with civil collection measures, as outlined in the original loan agreement. He left before she could say anything that would have required a response. Lenora stood in the doorway of the Battery Street house with the envelope in both hands, and felt for the first time in a very long while the specific vertigo of a person who had been running a performance so long they had forgotten it was a performance. And now the curtain had come down without warning, and there was nothing behind it. She called her attorney Bernard Oates that same morning. Bernard Oates had handled Vane family legal matters for 11 years, which meant he had spent 11 years being given partial information and asked to work with it. He was a competent man operating with incomplete data, which is to say he was a man doing his best in circumstances that had never been fully explained to him. Lenora asked him to contact Palmetto Agricultural Finance and negotiate a restructuring of the outstanding debt, an extension, a reduced payment plan, anything that would buy the family time. Bernard made the calls. He researched the company. He did what any thorough attorney does when engaging with an unfamiliar creditor. He pulled the registration records, identified the registered agent, and traced the corporate structure. He called Lenora back on a Wednesday afternoon. His voice, she told someone later, had a quality she had never heard in it before in 11 years. Not alarm exactly, but the careful flatness of a professional who has discovered something he is not sure how to deliver. "Or Lenora," he said. Palmetto Agricultural Finance, LLC is a wholly owned subsidiary of Dunn Harvest Foods Incorporated. The registered agent is Harker Legal Group on Broad Street. A pause. Josephine Harker is the registered agent. The room went very quiet around her. "Say that again," Lenora said. He said it again. She sat down. She sat down on the velvet settee in the front parlor, the one that had been in the Vane family for 4 generations, the one that appeared in 3 different portraits on the walls above it. And she sat there with her hands pressed flat on her knees, her back perfectly straight out of a lifetime of habit, and she stared at the middle distance while Bernard Oates continued speaking on the phone in her hand. Fletcher Dunn had been their creditor for 13 months. Every partial payment the Vane family had made to Palmetto Agricultural Finance, the checks Lenora had signed herself carefully on time, because she took contractual obligations seriously. Even when she was not honoring the spirit of other things, every one of those payments had gone into an account that belonged to Fletcher Dunn. The man she had dismissed at an engagement dinner. The man she had tried to remove from his own daughter's ceremony. The man she had sent a 12-page document designed to extract his company's equity. He had been holding her debt the entire time. The AG letter arrived the same afternoon. It came in the mail, a formal envelope from the office of the South Carolina Attorney General, addressed to Lenora Vane personally. The letter was 2 pages. It informed her that the office had received documentation pertaining to a potential violation of South Carolina Code Section 43-35-10, the statute governing financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and that the matter was under preliminary review. She was advised to retain legal counsel and to preserve all documents relevant to any estate planning communications she had engaged in over the preceding 18 months. Bernard Oates was still on the phone when she opened it. She read it without saying anything, and then she read it again, and her hand that was holding the letter had developed a fine tremor that she could not entirely control, not from age, not from cold, but from the particular physical response of a body absorbing two catastrophic pieces of information within the space of 1 hour. Under Bernard, she finally said, cutting off whatever he had been saying. I need you to come here. I can be there by 4, he said. Come now, she said. I learned about all of this through Clary, who heard pieces from 3 different people over the following week. A vendor contact, a title record search he had run on the Battery Street property as a matter of curiosity, and a brief conversation with Bernard Oates at a Chamber of Commerce luncheon at which Oates, to his credit, said nothing directly, but looked like a man who had not slept in 4 nights. Clary came to my office on a Thursday morning, sat down across from my desk, and recounted what he had pieced together. When he finished, he looked at me and said, she knows. Good son, I said. She knows about Palmetto. She knows about the AG filing. And she knows that she has been paying you for over a year while she was planning to take your company. He tilted his head slightly. How does that feel? I thought about it honestly. About the engagement dinner. About the wax-sealed envelope. About the folder with the letter V. I thought about 35 years of early mornings and late invoices and a company that had survived every lean season because I had signed my own name to things and held my own ground. It feels like accounting, I said. Nothing more than that. Clary looked at me for a moment. Then he stood up, collected his clipboard, and went back to the loading dock without another word, because we were both men who understood that there was still work to do, and that justice and payroll were not mutually exclusive. Charleston, South Carolina has a population of just over 300,000 people, which is large enough to have traffic and small enough that your accountant knows your dentist and your dentist went to school with your produce supplier. Things move through this city the way things move through any place where people have been living alongside each other long enough to know which questions to ask and which names to connect. The story of what happened with the Vane wedding moved quickly. There were 2 versions of it. Lenora's version, which circulated through the social channels she had cultivated for 30 years, the luncheons and the charity committees, and the drawing rooms of the old families on the south end of the peninsula, described the situation as a private family matter, a misunderstanding that had been handled with discretion, a decision that was mutual and dignified, and had nothing to do with financial difficulties of any kind. In Lenora's version, the bride's father was described, when described at all, as a well-meaning but overwhelmed man who had struggled with the social requirements of the occasion. She delivered this narrative with the fluency of someone who had been managing other people's perceptions of the Vane family for decades. The other version moved through different channels. It moved through the kitchens and loading docks and vendor relationships of Charleston's food and hospitality industry, through the people who had known Dunn Harvest Foods for years, who bought produce from Fletcher's drivers every Tuesday and Thursday morning, who had received his invoices and trusted his delivery schedules and shaken his hand at industry events without once needing to look at his last name to remember who he was. It moved through Pauline Dretch at Charleston Grand Manor, who had asked Josephine Harker at 2 a.m. if Fletcher was all right. It moved through the coordinator at Magnolia Table Catering, who had known for years that Dunn Harvest Foods was the most reliable supplier on the peninsula. It moved through 80 employees who had showed up every morning for anywhere from 6 months to 22 years and received their pay on time without exception. That version did not require much editorializing. The facts arranged in order told the story clearly enough. A man had funded a wedding. He had been told he was not welcome at the front of the ceremony. He had invoked his legal rights. He had gone to work the next morning. People who had worn name tags their entire careers understood exactly what that meant. They had spent their own working lives being the help, being the supplier, being the one who showed up before anyone arrived and left after everyone had gone home. They knew without being told the difference between a man who had thrown a tantrum and a man who had finally, after 8 months of absorbing one indignity at a time, simply stopped. Darnell told me about most of this over a Friday lunch in the warehouse break room, delivered in his characteristic style of stating facts and allowing the facts to carry whatever weight they naturally carried, without additional commentary. He mentioned 3 separate conversations he had overheard at the loading dock that week: vendors, a restaurant buyer, one of the long-haul drivers, in which Fletcher Dunn's name had come up with a quality he described as respect that had not been there before, in quite the same form. "Not that people didn't respect you," he clarified, tearing off a piece of bread. "But it's different now. Before it was business respect. Now it's personal. I am not interested in people's opinion of me." I said. "I know," Darnell said. "I am just reporting what I observe. It is what I do." He took a drink of his coffee. "You should know that the Harvest Fund event people are talking about you too." 2 days later, Terrence Odom called. Terrence was the executive director of the Carolina Harvest Fund, a nonprofit organization dedicated to food security and agricultural sustainability across the South Carolina Lowcountry. Dunn Harvest Foods had been a sustaining partner of the organization for 8 years, produced donations, driver volunteer hours, during their distribution, drives, and annual financial contribution that Terrence had told me more than once was one of the few they could genuinely count on. He was a lean, precise man of 55 who ran his organization with the same unhurried thoroughness with which he apparently did everything else in his life. And in 8 years of working together, we had developed the kind of professional relationship that occasionally ventured into the territory of actual friendship. "See, Fletcher," he said when I picked up, "the board has been talking, and we would like you to be our keynote speaker at this year's gala. I know you have declined before. I am calling personally to ask again because I think this year your voice is the right one for the room." I did not ask him what he meant by that. I thought I understood. "I will do it," I said. "Terrence, your transitional employment program, the one for people between positions. Is that still running?" "It is," he said. "It is one of our most consistent initiatives." "Why?" "I may know of a situation," I said. "Some individuals who will shortly be in need of structured transitional work. I cannot give you details yet, but I would appreciate it if you kept spaces available." I paused. They would need something with clear expectations and visible accountability. Terrence was quiet for a moment. Then he said in the measured tone of a man who had understood something without being told it directly, "I will make sure we have what we need." 3 days before the gala, Adrienne called. "I heard you are speaking at the Harvest Fund event," she said. Her voice was different from the one she had used in the warehouse when she had come to ask for money, quieter, without the rehearsed quality the voice she used when she was not performing anything. "And I am," I said. A pause. "Is it all right if I come?" I thought about it for a moment. About what the room would be on that evening and what she would see there, and whether she was ready to see it in a way that would help her rather than hurt her further. I made a decision. "Not this one," I said. "I need you to wait, sweetheart. Come to the next one. I will make sure you are there for the next one." She did not push back. She said, "Okay, Dad." 2 words, straightforward and without argument. And in those 2 words, I heard something I had not heard from her in well over a year, the sound of a person trusting someone else's judgment instead of running their own calculation. I held on to that for a moment after we hung up. Then I went back to work. The Francis Marion Hotel has stood on King Street in downtown Charleston since 1924, and in that time, it has hosted the kind of events that Charleston considers worth hosting: political gatherings, society weddings, the annual dinners of organizations whose names appear on building plaques across the city. It is a grand building in the old sense, with high ceilings and dark woodwork, and the particular smell of a place that has absorbed 100 years of occasions into its walls. I arrived at 7:15 in the suite I had bought 3 weeks earlier. Not rented. Bought. First time I had purchased a suit in 11 years. The last one was for Rosalind's memorial service. It felt right to have a new one for this. Terence met me at the entrance. Shook my hand with both of his the way he did when something mattered beyond the professional, and walked me through the lobby to the ballroom where 600 people were finding their seats. The room was lit warmly, tables dressed simply, but well the kind of event that spent its money on the cause rather than the centerpieces. A banner above the stage read, "Carolina Harvest Fund building food security for every low-country family." I scanned the room the way I always did in any large space, the habit of 35 years of early mornings and understanding a room before committing to it. I found them on the left side of the ballroom, near the service corridor. Lenora Vane was in the staff uniform of the evening, dark vest, white shirt, a catering tray balanced in both hands. Everett stood 10 feet away near the beverage station in the same uniform. Terence had mentioned it quietly at the entrance that 2 of the evening's volunteers had been referred through the Attorney General's Office Community Service Program. He had not given me names. He had not needed to. I looked at them long enough to confirm what I was seeing. Then I walked toward the stage. Terence's introduction was gracious and brief, as all good introductions are. He said, "Fletcher Dunn is the kind of partner who does not need to be reminded of his commitments. He simply keeps them. Please welcome him to the stage." 600 people applauded. I walked to the podium and looked out at the room. I found Darnell near the back, arms crossed, wearing the particular expression of a man who is proud of something, but has decided not to let that show. On the left side of the room, Lenora Vane held her catering tray and looked at the stage. Our eyes met. I held that for 1 second. Then I began to speak. I talked about hands. I told them my father had said the only things worth building were the things you built, knowing they could fail, because the possibility of failure was the only thing that gave the success any honesty. I told them I had started my career sweeping a market floor in the dark, and that the floor had taught me something the corner office never could. The work was the dignity, not the title, not the address, not the name on the invitation. I said, "The people in this room who have worn name tags their whole lives understand this better than I can say it. The question this organization asks every year is simply, will the people with resources remember it too?" I said, "The only things that truly last are built by people who expected nothing handed to them and built anyway. Not what we perform, not what we borrow, what we actually construct day after day, knowing we will be the one to answer for it." When I finished, the room was quiet for 1 full second. Then 600 people stood up. I stepped back from the podium. Across the applause, I looked left. Lenora Vane stood with the catering tray at her side looking at me. Her face held the expression of a woman who had spent 60 years understanding power and had just perhaps for the first time understood it correctly. No anger, no performance. Just the face of a person confronting the distance between what she had assumed and what had turned out to be true. I gave her a single quiet nod. Not acknowledgement of a victory, just the acknowledgement of a person who had been in the room. She looked away first. After the event, Terence handed me a small envelope. "One of the volunteers asked me to give this to you. Her name is Diane Calloway. She has been with the organization about 4 months, started before any of this, as far as I can tell." He paused. "She seemed to know who you were." I did not open it. "Tell Ms. Calloway my attorney's name is Josephine Harker. Whatever she needs to say, Josephine is the right person to hear it." I drove home along the Battery with the window down and the harbor dark beside me. I thought about Rosalind, who would have sat in the 3rd row and cried openly and denied it afterward to anyone who asked. I thought about Adrian. The one conversation that had not yet happened was the only one that still mattered. Charleston City Market is different at 3 in the morning than it is at any other hour. The vendor stalls are shuttered and the tourist foot traffic is long gone. And what remains is the structure itself, the long brick sheds that have stood on this block since 1804, older than most of the arguments people in this city still carry. The air is different, too closer to honest at that hour, salt from the harbor. The faint sweetness of the palmetto trees lining the nearby streets, and the cold, particular smell of old brick that has been absorbing the heat and releasing it every night for 200 years. I came here to think. I had been coming here for 35 years, since the mornings I swept these aisles with Roy's broom. I did not sweep anymore. I just sat. I was on the stone steps at the east end of the main shed when I heard her footsteps on the brick walkway. Deliberate, not hurried, the footsteps of someone who had decided something and was walking toward it rather than away from something else. I did not turn around. I already knew. She sat down beside me, not across from me, beside me. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her, the way you feel another person's presence when you have known them long enough that their nearness has its own temperature. I taught Lenora how to sideline you, Adrian said. Her voice carried none of the careful registers she used when managing a room. Just her voice, the one she had at 12 when she came to the warehouse after school, because she did not want to go home to an empty house. The seating chart. The planning meetings. The way she spoke to you at dinner. I knew what would make you comply without pushing back. I told her. Because I knew you better than anyone. She stopped. Then, the aisle. That was her idea. But I did not stop it. I could have. I sat with those words, the way you sit with something true that has been waiting a long time to be said. I know, I said. How long? She asked. Since the engagement dinner. When you introduced me as a family friend and did not correct yourself. Not because you forgot, because you had already decided that was the version you were going with. The familiar pull moved through my chest. Not anger, just the ache of a man who loved someone enough to watch them clearly. You are your mother's daughter in almost everything, Adrian. But your mother never once pretended she did not know me. She made a sound that lived between a sob and a word, raw, shapeless, the sound of someone who has held a thing so long, its release has no clean form. I was ashamed of where we came from, she said. Not of you, of the life. I thought if I could get far enough away from the delivery trucks and the warehouse, far enough from what our kitchen table looked like when I was 9 years old. Her breath shook. I was wrong. I knew I was wrong while I was doing it. That is the worst part. I reached out and placed my hand over hers on the cold stone step. Your mother was proud of every version of our life, I said. She used to say that starting with nothing meant everything you built after was entirely yours. I paused. She would have wanted you to have everything, Adrian, but she would have wanted you to want it for the right reasons. She turned her hand over and held on. The first delivery trucks arrived as the sky made good on its promise of morning. One by one, the lights came on in the vendor stalls. Carts rolled. Voices called. The particular organized noise of people who had been here since before dawn to make sure the day could begin properly. Adrian had not let go of my hand. I am sorry, Dad, she said. Simply. Without architecture. I know, I said. I know you are. Rosalind used to say that the rougher the hand, the more it had carried. She said it like it was something to be proud of. She was right. She was, as I have said, almost always right. It was enough. God help me, it was more than enough. There is something I want to say before I go. I spent 35 years building something real, and I almost let blind love destroy it. Family Stories revenge was never my plan, But when the moment came, I knew exactly where every door was, because I had always known. Don't be like me in this. Do not wait until someone has taken everything before you learn to say no. Do not confuse keeping the peace with keeping your dignity. The distance between those two things will cost you more than you want to pay. My personal opinion. This was never really about the money. It was about the right to exist in your own story without apology. I got $60,000 back. What I really got back was myself. God gave me a clear head and a good lawyer. I used both. Sometimes justice does not look like fire. Sometimes it looks like a signed contract and a 2 a.m. phone call, real quiet and entirely legal. If this story moved you, if you have ever been the person someone decided did not belong, drop a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. We do not do small here. Thank you sincerely for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. A note. Going forward. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and education. If that is not the content you are looking for, no hard feelings, find what fits you best. For everyone else, we will see you in the next one.